The tourist with a camera acted like he owned the palace, tossing coins, shouting commands, and demanding a show from the royal guard, convinced he could do anything. But when he pointed his camera at the guard at the worst possible moment, the guard's reaction left the crowd stunned. What happened next forever changed how everyone viewed tradition and respect. Let's start from the beginning. It was just another day at Buckingham Palace. The iconic gates, the throngs of tourists, and of course, the unflinching royal guard standing as a symbol of timeless British tradition. Sergeant Edward Harrison was on duty, a seasoned veteran of the Queen's Guard, known for his stone-like composure and unwavering discipline. His imposing figure, clad in the bright red uniform and topped with the iconic bearskin hat, stood as a living testament to duty and honor. But today wasn't just any day. Today, the circus came to town. Enter the tourist. Middle-aged, sunburned, wearing a t-shirt screaming, "I love London" in bold neon letters, because subtlety is overrated. Around his neck dangled a camera the size of a small planet, ready to immortalize his unique take on British heritage. He marched up to the White Line with the swagger of someone who believes their vacation budget entitles them to, well, anything. "Oi, mate, you alive in there?" he hollered, waving a hand dangerously close to Edward's face. Harrison didn't flinch. Of course he didn't. That's the whole point. But the tourist wasn't done. Oh no, this was just the warm-up. Pulling out his camera, he proceeded to strike poses, ridiculous ones, mind you, leaning awkwardly towards the guard. At one point, he even mimicked Edward's stoic expression, only to break into exaggerated laughter. "Come on, smile, you're on duty, right? Lighten up!" The crowd started to giggle. A few smartphones were already recording because, naturally, this was premium viral content. And then, as if on cue, the real chaos began. A teenager tossed a coin onto the ground near Edward's boots, snickering as if they'd just cracked the code of comedy. A young woman, perhaps emboldened by the crowd, decided it would be hilarious to reach for Edward's hat. Now, let's pause for a moment. Can we collectively agree this is the height of audacity? Touching a royal guard's bearskin? Really? It's like walking into an art museum and trying to high-five the Mona Lisa. Just no. Edward, of course, remained as steady as Big Ben. Not a twitch, not a flicker of emotion. But if looks could speak, the elderly woman standing nearby was practically screaming. Her disapproval radiated from her every wrinkle as she clutched her purse and tried in vain to silence the chaos. "Leave him alone," she murmured, her voice barely audible over the clamor. The crowd didn't care, the tourists didn't care. To them, Edward wasn't a person. He was an attraction, a glorified mannequin in a fancy uniform. And then it happened. The elderly woman, who had been standing near the gate, suddenly swayed. Her hand reached out, grasping at nothing, and her knees buckled. For the first time all morning, the laughter stopped. Edward moved in an instant, crossing the white line with a precision that only years of training could produce. Before anyone could react, he was at her side, steadying her before she could hit the ground. The crowd gasped. The tourist, still holding his camera, hesitated. Wait, is this part of the act? No, it wasn't part of the act. It was humanity, a concept clearly foreign to some. Edward's voice, calm but commanding, cut through the stunned silence. "Someone get help, now." And just like that, the scene shifted. The laughter was gone. All eyes were on the guard who had just shattered the barrier of protocol to save a stranger. But as for the tourist, he stood frozen, camera in hand, unsure whether to feel embarrassed or cheated out of his entertainment. The moment was over, but the impact just beginning. The air around Buckingham Palace grew thick with tension. The moment the elderly woman began to sway, the laughter stopped as if someone had hit mute on the scene. And just like that, Sergeant Edward Harrison broke his statue-like stillness. He moved with precision, one step, then another, crossing the sacred white line without hesitation. His arms reached out just in time to steady the woman before she could fall. "Ma'am, are you all right?" His voice, rarely heard by the public, was calm and laced with genuine concern. The woman looked up, her breathing shallow and uneven. She managed a weak nod, but her face told a different story. Harrison, ever the professional, quickly scanned her for signs of distress. Now, let's take a second to appreciate this moment. Here's a man trained to stand motionless for hours, unyielding to the world's chaos, now breaking protocol because someone needed help. It's the kind of thing that reminds you humanity still exists, even in a world full of smartphone-wielding opportunists. Speaking of opportunists, guess who wasn't about to let this moment pass unnoticed? That's right, Mr. I Love London himself. "Oh, this is gold," the tourist exclaimed, fumbling with his camera to capture the scene. He crouched slightly, angling for what he clearly thought would be the next viral masterpiece. "This'll get so many likes, mate. You're a star now." Seriously? Imagine watching someone save a life and thinking, how can I monetize this? But Harrison didn't flinch, not at first. His focus remained on the elderly woman, who was now seated on a nearby bench with the help of another bystander. He reached for his cloak, draping it over her shoulders like a true gentleman. She needs warmth and rest," he instructed firmly, glancing at a nearby officer. "Call for medical assistance immediately." The crowd had shifted by now. Gone were the mocking giggles and phone flashes. Instead, there were murmurs, hushed, almost embarrassed. A few onlookers even wiped at their eyes, clearly moved by the unexpected display of compassion. And then it happened. Harrison turned, his steely gaze locking onto the tourist. "Put the camera away," he said, his tone as sharp as a blade. For a moment, you could hear a pin drop. The tourist froze, blinking as if he hadn't heard correctly. What? It's just a video," he stammered, his bravado suddenly shrinking under the weight of the guard's presence. "Now," Harrison added, his voice low but unyielding. The crowd gasped. This was a line no one expected to be crossed. A royal guard, addressing someone directly? That wasn't in the script, but oh, how it worked. The tourist's face flushed crimson as he slowly lowered his camera. The weight of the crowd's judging stares was palpable. People whispered, a few even shaking their heads in quiet disapproval. Let's be honest, you were thinking it too, weren't you? Finally, someone told him off. Meanwhile, Harrison turned back to the elderly woman, ensuring she was comfortable. The ambulance sirens wailed faintly in the distance, and a small child in the crowd clapped their hands softly, as if cheering for a superhero. And maybe, just maybe, they were right. For a man sworn to silence and stillness, Harrison had spoken volumes. He didn't need to lecture the crowd or argue with the tourist. His actions did all the talking, dignity, honor, and compassion in the face of chaos. And yet, as the ambulance arrived, you couldn't help but wonder, what was the tourist thinking now? Probably not about likes anymore. As the ambulance disappeared into the London streets, taking the elderly woman to safety, the silence around Buckingham Palace broke into an unexpected wave of applause. It wasn't the polite clapping of an audience watching a play. No, this was raw, genuine appreciation. A sound that resonated with every person present who had just witnessed something extraordinary. Sergeant Edward Harrison, unshaken as always, returned to his post. His bearskin hat stood tall, his red uniform still pristine despite the unexpected events. He adjusted his stance, took his position, and stared straight ahead as if nothing had happened. Because, to him, nothing had. He'd simply done his duty. But for the crowd, this was far from ordinary. Phones were still raised, recording what they could, and whispers filled the air. "Did you see that? He actually helped her. I didn't know they could even move." Meanwhile, standing awkwardly on the sidelines was our infamous tourist, Mr. I Love London. The earlier bravado on his face was now replaced with a mix of embarrassment and unease. Oh, he'd gotten attention all right, just not the kind he wanted. By the time the crowd dispersed, the internet had already taken over. Videos of the incident were uploaded to every social media platform within minutes, and while Edward resumed his silent vigil, the world buzzed with opinions. Respect to this guard, he's a real hero. Why are people so disrespectful? That tourist was embarrassing. This is why we need to protect traditions. And then, inevitably, the spotlight turned to the tourist himself. The man who had been so desperate for likes and views now found himself at the center of ridicule. Comment sections lit up with scathing critiques of his behavior. Who goes to Buckingham Palace and acts like this? Tourist entitlement at its finest. Cringe. Maybe next time, respect the people keeping traditions alive. The collective judgment was swift and frankly deserved. But Edward? He remained silent through it all, as steadfast as ever. While the internet raged and debated, he stood tall at his post, his gaze fixed ahead. No comments, no reactions, just the embodiment of dignity. And that's what stayed with people. Not the tourist antics or the social media fallout, but the image of Edward Harrison, a man who broke protocol to help someone in need and then quietly returned to his duty, no fanfare required. As the day wound down, a small group of tourists lingered near the gate, their earlier light-hearted chatter replaced with a hushed reverence. One of them, a young man, spoke softly, almost as if addressing himself. "Now I get it," he said. "I understand why they're here." The laughter, the mockery, the jeers, they had all melted away. What was left was respect. And as the sun began to set over Buckingham Palace, another ripple of applause broke out among the remaining crowd. It wasn't loud or staged, it was heartfelt. Edward didn't react, of course. He simply stood there, as unyielding as the traditions he represented. But if you looked closely, just for a moment, you might have caught the faintest flicker of satisfaction in his otherwise stoic expression. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough.